Thanks to our Patreon members for helping to make this episode possible, and we're now available on all the major podcasting platforms. You can find more information at the links below. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the United States as seen from France. Originally, this was going to be a lecture that I was going to deliver live in the United States, but my plane flights were canceled twice, and it was unclear when we could rebook them, so just kind of gave up. So still not in the United States. So I'm going to reschedule for some time in the future, probably around Christmas. So in lieu of a live lecture, I am providing this sort of substitute, although let me tell you, I very much would have preferred to be there live. And I apologize to everybody who was planning to come. I was planning to come myself. So, and for those of you on Patreon, some of this is abstracted from things I've already mentioned in the French Diaries series, but I want to kind of bring this all together and try to create a reflection on the subtle and profound differences between the two countries and how they're manifest and how they're lived and experienced. One aspect of this is sort of the data, and I'm going to start there, kind of the objective baseline things, some of the key indicators that I've been able to dig up that make this look meaningful and, kind of objective numbers you can put your hands on. But I think more importantly, in the second half, I'll talk about how those ramify into a subjective experience of life. And that is really the part that I think is to me most interesting, but of course it's more subjective. So I'll start with some of the structural framing elements and then move on to the subjective experience as lived and as I watch French people live in a very different kind of world. So number one here, so if you want to take notes or something on this is, I think, an interesting way to approach this, is the average full-time French worker, so you got a regular job, you're working full-time, works 500 fewer hours a year than the average full-time American employee. Again, that is 500 hours less. 500 fewer hours a year than the average full-time American worker. It's a stunning number. How does this work out? Well, one, the French work week is 35 hours, and it's carefully regulated. Like, you're really, really not supposed to work more than 35 hours a week. And if you do work regularly more than 35 hours a week, your employer has to give you more vacation time. So some people will have like 9-10 weeks a year of vacation because, like some doctors who work long shifts for hospital purposes, then they just get 10 weeks off a year. So it works out the same. If you work extra, you're just getting more vacation time. So that's one big issue here. The average American full-time worker works about 42 hours a week. So that's just 7 hours a week fewer hours right off of the get-go, right? So that's just the basic full-time work week is just much shorter in France than it is in the United States. Then the minimum amount of vacation days in France is 5 weeks. So that person is working 7 hours fewer and they're getting 5 weeks of paid vacation a year. And that paid vacation time must be taken. You can't not take your vacation time. So you have forced vacation and you get to schedule it when you want. You negotiate this with your employer, but basically you take it when you want. They generally want you to take 3 to 4 weeks all at one go because most companies just shut down. Everybody goes on vacation and then they come back. This is why everything's closed in August in France, because that gets most of the vacation time out of the way for everybody, and then everybody can figure out the last couple of weeks there. And then there's 11 paid public holidays a year in France, which is another 2 weeks of vacation time functionally. And then people use the remaining vacation days, which they append on either end of these public holidays, to create 5-day vacations or 5-day vacations over holidays. So that if there's a Monday public holiday, then people will take 2 of their vacation days on Thursday and Friday, and then they're off from Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and then they go back to work on Tuesday. And so there's a lot of this that goes on. And so when you do this math, what you end up with is about 500 fewer hours a year of a full-time worker that works. And so you have just vastly more private time, personal time, time for you, your family, and your friends, and whatever else, your interests, whatever it is you want to do, you have a lot more time to do that. And again, this is highly regulated. So employers face all kinds of problems if they violate this. So they're trying to make sure you don't violate these rules. And you of course, an interest in not violating these rules. So everybody agrees that you shouldn't work more than 35 hours a week and that you should get your vacation time, because otherwise, wow, the fines are pretty steep here in France. So think about that. So free time is just vastly more available here. Second, debt. So the average French household, now these calculations are because you're going across income to debt ratios, you're looking at different ways of calculating what counts as debt, so on and so forth. But basically, it works out that the average American has at least twice, it's probably more than that, but I'll go on the conservative side, at least twice as much debt as the average French person or French household. You can do it as household or as individuals. It's quite different because then you get the mortgage issue comes in differently. But basically, the average American has twice as much debt as the average French person. And there's laws in France, again, tightly regulated, that say you cannot have all of your debt, figure out any of your debt, credit card, car payment, mortgage, all of these things, add them up. They cannot exceed 30% of your income. So there's a pretty hard cap, which again is pretty carefully regulated. It's not that people don't get around it, so on and so forth. But there's a pretty hard cap on keeping payments for credit under control and capping the amount of debt you can actually get into. That's a pretty aggressive position that the French government has taken on this to protect people from falling into poverty and from bankruptcy and all of this. So you have half as much debt, relatively speaking, at least for the average French family, average French individual, than the average American. And then crucially, going along with that, is you have a kind of an inverse economy. I would say the economies work just in the opposite emphasis. So in the United States, over the last, many economists have talked about this, is that over the last 30 years with the imports from China, what you had was a relatively low inflation environment. And because you had all of these consumer goods that were getting cheaper and cheaper because they were being manufactured in China, the efficiencies of importation and shipping had all gone through the roof. And there's all just wow, this is amazing. Like consumer goods are so cheap. And it's true compared to France, where consumer goods cost somewhere between 25 and 50% more on average than they do in the United States. And so when you look at just pure material objects surrounding you, generally speaking, in France, you do see a less emphasis on and less presence of just random consumer goods. It's palpable, particularly coming from the United States and moving to France. You're like, wow, there is this initial sense of like, oh, they just don't have as much new stuff going on. However, the inverse of this is while all of that stuff was getting cheaper in the United States, everything else was exploding in cost. So housing, medical care, education, insurance, right? All these things were growing much faster than inflation in the United States. And so the underlying rate of inflation, food, and in France, food is 20 to 40% cheaper in the grocery store than it is in the United States. Plus they have all the food purity laws. Higher education is, give or take free. You have to pay for housing, although it's subsidized if you live on campus. But you can look at fees for university in France of 200 to 300 euros a year, maybe more. But this is risible compared to the amount of money that the tens of thousands of dollars it costs in the United States. Healthcare it's slightly complicated, but roughly how it works is the government takes care of 80% of all your healthcare costs, so you don't pay those. You're responsible for the other 20%. But how that works out is many employers, I would say most employers, and certainly most big employers, they pay that 20%. So if you're a full-time worker or even a part-time worker, there's a good chance your employer is paying all or most of that, so you don't pay anything. If you're poor, the government pays this. If you're old and retired, the government probably pays this for you. If you're a child, don't even worry about it. If you're a pregnant mother, it's all covered. So now who's left to pay that 20%? Well, if you're an independent contractor or somebody else, middle-class person like this, well, you have to pay this other 20%. And this is hilarious, coming from the United States. So what this works out to be functionally is, one, you're required to have insurance to pay for that remaining 20%. So the government's never stuck with that bill. The insurers have to. So they do have this sort of private insurance. But for my wife and I, who are both over 50, and we have the best insurance you can get. I mean, it's just, there's not optical, dental, it's everything. And it's like, I think 115 euros a month for us. But even if you don't have that insurance, you can just decide to pay cash if you want for some reason. I mean, you have to make an agreement to do that. But like a doctor's visit is 25 euros. And so the government will pay 80% of that. So that means you're left with 5 euros would be your cost to go to the doctor if you didn't have insurance. With insurance, of course, the insurance pays that 5 euros. Before we even got in the insurance system, my wife needed to get her eyes checked. So she went to the optometrist and got the full optical workup because she didn't have any records from the United States. You know, the whole thing, we're starting over. And the optometrist apologized on developing a new prescription for her and writing the whole thing up and running through all the tests because he said, because you're not part of the system, I just have to charge you and I feel bad, but it's going to be 32 euros. And we were just like, oh God, this is so hilarious. So healthcare here is a total, I'm not saying it's a perfect system, the French love to complain about it, but so your health insurance, education, both functionally, 5% of the cost at most. It may be less, maybe more, but it's not quite free. But boy, it sure feels like it when you're coming from the U.S. system. And then housing is very interesting. So one of the problems, if you look at statistics for housing in France, is you get the Paris area, and the Paris metropolitan area has about 15 to 20% of the population of France. So it's really, really significant. But 80% of the people don't live there. And Paris is simply, it's almost a city not in France because, you have money from all over the world pouring in there. You have all the money in France is in. So Paris is like on this separate economy, basically. And if you look at housing for the other 80% of the French people who don't live basically in the Paris metro area, the Ile-de-France, as they say, it's so much cheaper. It is amazing. So just for a record, housing in the United States on average is about 5 times income, like debt to, and your income to housing costs is about 5 to 1. In France, this varies between 2.5 to 3, give or take. But the important thing is if you subtract Paris from that, it drops dramatically. And so most of France does not live in that one major metropolitan area, 80%. The difference is in the United States, 80% of the population does live in the major metropolitan areas that are heavily influenced or affected by housing inflation, which, of course, everybody living in the United States knows this. And so while the average or the median they're still hugely variant, like a multiple less in France. But that is because Paris is so far off of the charts compared to most of the rest of France, and that it literally throws all the numbers off. But for the other 80% of the population, and Paris, by the way, is still cheaper, but the other 80% are living in a different world where rent, for instance, outside of the Ile-de-Paris is usually about 20% of income for French people, as opposed to way over 30 and much higher in the major metropolitan areas. House to income ratio in LA, I think, is something like 12. It's a 12x, as opposed to 2 to 3 in France. So, so the housing is just vastly less expensive, like a multiple less expensive relative to income. Of course, all this has to be adjusted for income. And so you have this strange contrast where you have an entire population that is working dramatically fewer hours. They have half, give or take, or less of the debt that the average American is carrying. That while consumer goods are more expensive and hence less palpable, less everywhere, the other parts of life, all the sort of necessities of life, education, healthcare, housing, transportation. We don't even talk about transportation and the availability of public transportation throughout much of the country, adds up to it's just a very different experience of the world. Your food is less expensive, your housing is less expensive, your education is functionally free. You don't really have to worry about medical care to nearly anything remotely like the same sense, and you just can't have as much debt as you do in the US. And so that the accumulation of those distinctions creates somewhat, I think, or contributes to some very interesting social patterns. And this is where we move to the subjective side. So again, just to recap, much less working, much less debt, much cheaper housing, cheaper food, cheaper healthcare, pretty much free-ish education, access to public transportation. Okay, what does this mean? It means people are just more relaxed. I mean, it is continuously astonishing to me. You have this sense of, at first I just thought French people were very patient. Like, oh, but they're not patient. They just don't care. They're just not, they're just not in a hurry. And so like, oh, for us, it looks like, oh, they're being patient to do this or wait for that or something. And no, they're just not, they're not. So if you go to a cafe, particularly if it's moderately busy, it may take a while for the waiter to get around to you, but nobody seems to care about that. And it may take a while for your food to get there because the kitchen may be busy and it's probably small. And so, but then nobody seems to care about that. And then they're never going to bring you a bill because they just expect you to stay forever because, of course, you're not in a hurry and they're not in a hurry. And so we're all just relaxed and everything is just fine. And that experience is not one-off. It's not like, oh, just when you go to the cafe, you experience that. It's like when you go to cross the street, like big truck drivers will stop their big rigs and just like happily let you cross. And I mean, the honking is 1,000,000 times less than in the United States. I mean, you do see occasionally, of course, it's all in a ratio. You do see people who seem to be very much in a hurry and trying to get someplace and they're very busy and very important and they stand out. Right? And so it's palpable. You're like, oh, that person seems a little frenetic and crazy. In the United States, they wouldn't even be noticeable. Another, where, of course, I live in coffee shops, and so I notice this is the ratio of coffee drunk in a coffee shop to takeaway coffee. And one of the coffee shops I go to very regularly, Le Drop, I forget that they have takeout coffee because I go, say 5 days a week. And I just never see it. And then it was it was warm and everything was happening and the vacationers were here. And all of a sudden I saw two people walk out with to-go cups. And I was like, oh, they have to-go cups. Wow, they have to-go coffee. And that to me is just the quintessential essence to me of part of the experienced lived difference in France is people, even if they just sit down for 10 minutes and drink some, they do this. They'll just come in, sit down, take 10 minutes, drink their coffee, and go. They stop. They come in, they sit down, they drink their coffee, and they go away. It's not like that everybody sits in the cafe for hours and hours. I'm still somewhat of an outlier there. But it's 98.2%. And it's not even that. It's like 99.1 or less. I even can't figure out what the number is of the ratio of people who drink their coffee, sitting down, chatting with their friends or reading the newspaper or whatever, versus the percentage who take coffee to go, because they don't all feel the press to go someplace. Like why do I need to go someplace? If I'm here, why do I enjoy myself when I'm here? And if I'm not going to enjoy myself here, why am I here? I should go someplace where I'm going to enjoy myself, right? It's this continual, because I'm not in this free time deficit. I'm not continuously feeling pressed for whatever it is, right? Like, I got to get to the next thing. I got to get to the next thing. No, you don't have to get to the next thing because you're not trying to squeeze everything in. I see it very much with families. If you watch a French family load and unload the kids from their car, and again, on average, it's vary. You'll see occasionally the busy hassle, but they take this time and they're like, no hurry, and the kids are getting out, and the parents are chatting with them, and they get the car seat, or then they get the stroller out, and they all it's the same process everybody has to do, but they just aren't frenetic about it. And it's like, oh, because they're not in a hurry. And it's easy to say, oh, Americans are all keyed up, and for which they are, of course. But part of it is the average French worker has 500 more hours a year to burn. And one way they decide to burn them is by being relaxed when they're with their kids. Or another example is because a lot of high school students in France go away to school. So they're residents. So they go to school, they stay in the dorms for a week, and they come home on the weekends. And so I've been at the train station a couple of times when it's Sunday evening and the families are there dropping their kids off to go to school. And they don't drop them off. They park the car, they get out, and they stand and chat with their children until the train comes. I mean, you do see the occasional late running parent, and the kid jumps out, and everybody's laughing like, mom, you got to get your act together, and they're all having fun, and it's all hilarious. But almost all of them are standing there with their high school students chatting away as they get ready to go back for the week. They park the car. They get out and they stand with their kids waiting for the train. And it doesn't seem like a big deal. But when you just continually see these kinds of things over and over again, you're like, oh, they're not in a rush. They're not in a hurry. They don't feel like they have something more important to do than drop their kids off and spend time with them. Right? That to them, this is the most important things that they could do. And the kids seem happy to be with the parents. They're like, oh yeah, we're going to go to school. We're fine. We don't feel rushed off our feet. We don't feel hectic and frenetic. We're just going back to school. And, mom and or dad are here with us, and we're just going to chat and hang out. And then when the bus comes or the train comes, we'll just, off they go. Everybody waves, bees all around. And then we're off to school. And it's like, wow, it's just shocking. And it's subtle, but also shocking. And again, I do live in rural France. So, when you get into the Ile-de-Paris, things are a little more frenetic, of course, because it's the big city. But again, 80% of people don't live there in France, which is the inverse of the United States, where somewhere around 80% of the population do live in the major metropolitan areas. In France, it's 80% live outside of the major metropolitan area, which is the Ile-de-Paris. I mean, there's Bordeaux and Lyon, but comparatively speaking, these are not huge cities. So that is one way it manifests itself. Another way it manifests itself is just less emphasis on material goods generally. It's not, they have fine craftsmanship, they have wealthy people in France, it's just... But, it's just not as big of a deal. It's hard to quite quantify it, but it's just less, you just feel this less press, less emphasis, there's less bling, there's less showiness. In fact, there's a phrase I think I've mentioned before called the French are not impressed. They just don't care. If you want to buy expensive things, that's fine. Go ahead, knock yourself out. But they're just not impressed. They just don't care. They're just not that interested in your expensive things. Nice for you, So you'll see nice cars in France. There are people in France who have, Ferraris and Aston Martins. They do this kind of thing. But most people are like, hey, that's good for them. I just don't care. I don't care about my car. I have a car. Not everybody has cars, but but a lot of cars in France, a lot of Peugeots and Renaults all over the place. But people tend to drive like transportation, like it's a way of getting around. It's not a status symbol. It's not a way of showing off. It's not a way of impressing anybody, because basically, again, people are impressed. They're like, we don't care about that. It's not that important to us. And so when you have a bunch of free time, and when you have basically structural governmental programs and projects to prevent you from going into debt, what do? You do things like, hey, you know what's cheap? Food and wine. This is, relatively speaking, very inexpensive. You can buy ridiculously good wine for cheap here. And so one reason that people, I would argue the French people love food and wine, and of course there's a feedback loop. They love food and wine, so they have these programs, and food and wine is cheap, so hey, why not? Is you've got a lot of free time, and you have access to unbelievably high quality food and ingredients very, very inexpensively, relatively speaking. Well, let's do that. Right? Let's hang out with our friends and make food, eat food, take food around, drink, and hang out because we have time to do that. And so it's like, oh, well, this makes sense because it's affordable, it's available, it's great, and you have the time to do it. And it's just like, oh, great. Yeah, let's do a 2-hour lunch. And I've become convinced that part of it is, I think French people are maybe more stressed and in more of a hurry than they look to be. But it's just you lose status points, you lose style points if you look like you're in a hurry in France. Like everybody's got to pretend like they're not in a hurry all the time because it's just so déclassé to look like somebody who's really overwhelmed and has so much to do. You're supposed to look like, no, wealth is leisure. And so if you're hustling around and working and, got a side hustle and all that, then you're just poor. Then you look poor and you look, sort of the hopeless. I think this is part of it. It's just a cultural, very different cultural stylistic emphasis. And that, like I always say in France, the people don't have side hustles because they don't have hustles, right? You don't have a first hustle from which to have a side hustle. Therefore, there is no such thing as a side hustle because there's no hustle, because that's just, wow, talk about losing style points. If you look like that person, you're just kind of sad. I mean, even to the point where it's so infectious is that I flew from Paris to London a while ago. Those flights weren't canceled. Hello. And we just had the loveliest meal in the Charles de Gaulle airport, and the staff was relaxed and the service was relaxed and the space was beautiful. And I'm like, and the food was good. It's like, it was really good. I was like, how is this possible? And then we got to London Heathrow. No, it wasn't London Heathrow, London Gatwick, I think. And we got off and like, oh my God, the tone, the feel of the place was just so frenetic. And there was no restaurant you could have sat in and had that kind of experience in the entire place. And it's like, oh, different culture, different space, different sensibility. It was just stunning. Like the feel was just so epically different. And so what is it? So this kind of builds up, like I said, this just layer upon layer of be more relaxed. You have more time to socialize, so socialize. You have more, the financial structure encourages you to spend more money on like food and socializing and social events than it does on, big screen TVs, because they're just, big screen TVs are, relatively speaking, more expensive. So don't do that. Do other things. And it just builds up, right? It is just this accumulation of difference so that people are, I think, while they look maybe on the surface a little poorer, and you don't see lots of this just infinite amount of big cars and expensive cars and big trucks. Basically, they don't have trucks here. Pretty much all of Europe is truck free. I mean, there are occasional trucks, of course, but 90% less trucks, and certainly no lifted big, quote unquote, impressive trucks. In fact, there was a car show in the park right near where we live the other day, and they had some American cars because those were fancy, and they had fancy French cars. And I thought it was hilarious because I've been to malls to do whatever. Shopping, that I've seen nicer collections of cars just randomly parked outside of a big shopping center or something. Like it was like, oh no, you guys don't really. I mean, these are some nice cars and interesting. Of course, the historical cars are fascinating, but you're just like, God, this is sort of, you don't really get it. You're not really like, I'm not making that up. I mean, because we've all been to that, like particularly if you're in a nice area somewhere around LA or maybe Monterey, these more San Francisco, and one of these, kind of Tony shopping centers, and there's, a bunch of Porsches and Ferraris and, Maseratis and all that, just, Lexuses and all just everywhere, right? They're just half the cars seem to be those. Like, yeah, like you guys don't even match like the parking lot outside of a Tony shopping district in the United States, and you're a car show. It's just that extreme of a difference, right? It's just huge. And so that all those structural elements reinforce, like, kind of eat, drink, and be merry, almost to put it into a phrase, right? It's like, oh, well, this is what's cheap. This is what's easy. This is what doesn't stress me out. I have time. I have space. My many people, all, by the way, another time element is they drive much less. They drive about half as much as you do in the United States. So again, hence cars are less important, and you consume a lot less fuel, so you don't have those expenses quite, although fuel is wildly more expensive. But that expense is less, and you have less time in the car. So again, more relaxing, less of that. And subjectively, finally, to wrap this kind of long ramble up, is on the surface, you go, here's, a first world nation. There's cars, there's traffic, they have planes, they have Wi-Fi, they have, 5G, all the things that you associate with the modern world. They have big screen TVs. None of this is, unknown. It's all here. But the feel day to day is just dramatically different. And the cumulative impact of that, I think, is what ends up being so different. They read more, they spend more time at lunch, they spend more time in cafes, they spend more time socializing. If you look at all those numbers, and what that adds up to is on the other end is sort of the mental health metrics, the health metrics, the life expectancy. So I think life expectancy now in France and Europe generally is like a decade more than the U.S. Suicide rate much lower, drug addiction rate vastly lower, alcoholism rates lower, crime rates lower. If you look at the prescription drugs for mental illness, vastly lower, right? Obesity lower, just every whatever it is, it's lower. And by the way, one of my favorite ones is that the life expectancy is much longer, even though they just smoke more. I'm like, it's always that was sort of seemingly baffling on the surface, but when you start thinking about it, you go, oh, smoke some and then have a much less stressful, more relaxed life in many ways. So that is not all of it. I could go on, but I do think that set of sort of numbers to sort of encapsulate this felt sensibility. And if the only place you've been is Paris, even though some people I've talked to in Paris say the same thing, like, yeah, they feel it immediately. They feel this difference from the U.S. or from other places they're coming from. But once you get outside of the Ile-de-Paris or the Ile-de-France, you get this it is very, very different. I think it's different in Paris again, but still, once you get out of that environment, which is, of course, it's the most visited city in the world, you have traffic, you have tourists, you have expense, it's noise, it's all of those things, but it's also amazing and beautiful, and wow, Paris. But then you get away from there and you're like, wow, this really is truly a very different mode of existence that emphasizes, it has all the same elements, but it doesn't emphasize consumption and consumer goods. It actually de-emphasizes them. High VAT tax, sales tax here is super high. Resistance to debt, so you can't just get a credit card and buy things. You can't put it on all these kinds of issues. Conversely, the social infrastructure, the things you need to live, like healthcare and insurance and transportation and education and housing, just much simpler for the person to access. And that ratio, that shift in ratio and that shift in emphasis in life and lifestyle and mode of being manifests itself in an entirely different just sense of existence. And so if anybody's thinking about traveling in Europe or thinking about traveling in France in particular, look for that, watch, feel. And I think if you start reflecting on it, you'll go, oh, there it is. Oh, yeah. Conversely, if you're in the U.S., or visiting the US, look for the other side of it. Look for how much emphasis is put on consumption, how easy credit is, how readily available it is, how much it's pushed on you continuously, how much driving there is, how many nice cars there are. Oh my God, so many nice cars everywhere. And then the emphasis, that distinction of the 80% of people living in these metropolitan areas that are really feeling that pressure even more intensely, versus the inverse, where only 20% live in the major metropolitan area in France. And so, yeah, together, wow, what a massive distinction. It's just of emphasis, but the cumulative emphasis is truly profound. Thank you very much.